Hello again. This is our next daily insight video, and today I want to speak a little bit to trauma-informed activism. Kind of hits the chord of our day-to-day here at the conference also, and maybe just a few nuggets of inspiration to walk with today. I mean, activism is a call, is that I feel, that I see that there's something in the world that needs attention. And I feel a deep resonance with whatever needs attention. And my agency, the power to contribute, the power to move something, the power to have impact, um, can create enormous results. And we have seen this through many people that really created new movements, created amazing impact in the world. And so that's fantastic. And so, why do we call it trauma informed activism? Because often, also, of course, especially also in the NGO world, we see often places or parts of our population or certain individuals that really need help because of the trauma they carry. So there's trauma informedness in the sense of meeting a need in the world where trauma plays a role for certain populations that we address with what we do. But on the other hand, sometimes our own trauma creates like a response to external circumstances. And so the motivation is both. It's my agency, but it's also partly my pain that's responding to something that I see outside. And and first of all, having a differentiation and see, okay, my own healing journey and my work in the world is often also amplifying my own healing journey. And the more I heal through the work I do and through the inner work I do, the more I become a conduit for a wiser, more integrated agency and even more empowered agency. So this means our healing, our own healing journey is not in the way or an obstacle. Our own healing journey is also part of the way, and often is the transformational power that turns us into becoming a remedy. And certainly, I have in the last years had many interviews for the summit or also this conference that where we could see that the internal journey of a person actually is the fuel for their impact and their activism in the world. And there's a real beauty to that. So it means as we do our inner work, our activism becomes less polarizing, less fragmented, becomes more integrated, becomes more onboarding of multiple voices and diversity, and and also of multiple approaches to solve certain complex issues. And it definitely enhances collaboration. And if we need one thing currently in our world is like the power of collective intelligence, the power of collective wisdom that can impact certain of the large scale issues also that we have, like climate change or conflicts or inequality or racism in the world. So I think that there we need collectives to do the work to transform not only our internal state as population, but also the structures that we have in the world, and to do that in a way that can host contradiction, that can host fragmentation, that can host polarization, and turn the unconscious tension in the collective system into a creative growth. And I think that's why listening to our speakers today that are bringing their passion, but also their own personal journey into the conference, then and that can be a great inspiration to see. Yeah, sometimes coming from our own pain is actually the fuel of a purpose that unfolded over a lifetime sometimes and really turned us into a better and better remedy for what we bring into the world. So I wish you a beautiful day with our amazing speakers today and potentially the workshop. And yeah, see you soon.
Abigail E. Disney is a philanthropist and social activist who works with organizations supporting peace building, gender justice, and systemic cultural change. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose latest film is The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales.
My name is Thomas Hübel, and I'm very excited to be sitting here with you, Abigail. Abigail Disney is joining us today, so very warm welcome.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm curious to learn from you. And the first thing I would love, maybe if you could share with us, is first of all, what are you most passionate about now? And then maybe you can speak a little bit to like your journey that made you be passionate about what you're passionate about now. And that we can see a little bit your life trajectory leading up to this moment in your life and all you're doing now. So we can
That's
learn
a
a
good
bit.
question. That's a big question. So I think from even as a little child, I was very concerned with what was fair and what wasn't fair. That was just kind of an upset. I think because I was a middle child. As a middle child, you pay a lot of attention to who's getting what and whatever. But I was conscious very young that we were well-resourced as a family and that something different was happening with us than with my friends and so forth. So I've had my eye on that all my life. And I left home, I went to college, I decided to go to graduate school at Columbia. And I found myself in the 1980s in New York City, in a city where the homelessness crisis was really out of hand. And I mean, I saw a person step over another person, to get to work. And that was a moment for me. I mean, I had a sense that things weren't right or fair, but where do you have to have fallen to be able to step over another human being? It just something was very wrong. And so I started a long journey into things like giving money to charities and then starting my own foundation and then volunteering for things, that kind of thing. And one thing led to another, and I have increasingly tried to figure out how to use the resources that I was given and the resources that I've developed over time to make the most difference, which is a very, mushy way of saying it. But in essence, it's about, bringing as much peace into the world as I possibly can and as much fairness into the world as I can. And so that led me to filmmaking, and I made a couple of films. And then a couple of years ago, some of the workers at Disneyland reached out to me, and my great uncle was Walt, my grandfather was Roy Disney. We went there a lot as kids, and I have such affectionate memories of being there with my grandfather. He was a lovely man. And one of the things he always said to us was, "Don't you dare disrespect those people who work at the park. They work so hard." And so that was really important to him. And everybody knew him by his first name, and he knew everybody else. And it was a really warm relationship. So in 2018, when I got an email or a message on Facebook from some of the workers saying, they won't even negotiate with us. We're making $11 an hour. I can't feed my family, those kinds of things. I knew enough about the world to know that was happening at almost every company. I had never wanted to go toward the family company as a way of this crusade of making things fair. It always felt too big and too scary for me to try to take on. But I had a long think about it. My first reaction was to tell him, well, I can't help you. There's nothing I can do. And I thought, well, that's not the most honest answer. And I had to admit to myself there wasn't nothing that I could do, and then like, aren't we all challenged in life to figure out if it's not nothing, then what is it? And I started to talk about it more publicly. First of all, in the context of the CEO's salary, which his compensation for that year was, now I'm forgetting the number, but it was $25 million or something crazy like that. And, it seemed like a good way to bring some focus on just how obviously, viscerally wrong this was. And when that started to get some traction, it felt like, well, okay, so let's talk about this. What do I do? I make films. So I started a film about it, and it came out in 2022 at the Sundance Film Festival. It was called The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales. And it was an attempt to kind of put together, Disney's such an interesting company because basically everything about American business is right there in that company. Everything, every labor problem, every copyright problem, everything. And they do so many different businesses. And then everything about Americans and what they think about themselves is there in that company too. Every fantasy we have, every fear we have. It feels like if you're going to talk about America and its super ego, that Disney is a perfect place to go. And so we tried to kind of weave a story together of, first of all, what happened at Disney, what I remember as opposed to what exists now, what is life like for workers there now, and then to weave it together with the story of American history and especially American corporate history in the way in the last 50 years it's radically changed and has amount to a massive change in the personality of the country we live in. I mean, I can remember it being a different country. That has kind of led me to where I am right now, which is to say, well, okay, you've looked at your family, and I've done as much as I could, and I'm proud to say they got up to $18 an hour and then a 42% raise from there. So I'm proud of that. But I've always known in the back of my mind that there was a story about my mother's side of the family that came from Louisiana, all the way back to the first white settlers there. And I had never let myself look at it before. And I feel like Americans, we give ourselves so much latitude not to look at things. We dedicate so much energy to not knowing things. And so I decided to start to have a look at that story. And of course, it's the story that, I wish weren't true. But of course, there were humans that were owned, bought and sold by my ancestors back through the generations. And it's, so the question is that I'm now kind of really circling around is like, what does that ask of me? What does that mean? Because, a lot of people dismiss that question right away. I mean, and, especially people in the South will say, well, that has nothing to do with me. I didn't do any of these things. I didn't buy and sell anybody. I haven't benefited by it. Those things are all true for me as well. But when your stomach kind of grabs hold, sometimes that this isn't nothing. And I've spent my life kind of benefiting in ways I never even tried to benefit by the relationship I have to this person that I barely knew. He died when I was 6. And it seems natural to people to like offer me credit for things I haven't done and think that I'm smarter than I am, laughed hard at my jokes. I've benefited by that in 1,000 different ways. Doesn't it stand to reason that I also need to take in the things that are negative and look at those as well? I can't do one thing and not the other. So that's what I'm kind of preoccupied with right now. And that's kind of led me to thinking about and studying this question of moral injury, which is, as I'm sure about it because you study trauma. It's came from the study of trauma. It's not precisely trauma. But, I was raised in a home where racist things were said and done. And my mother was repeating what she'd been taught, and her mother was repeating what she had been taught. And I never knew where quite to put that. And I think there's a, obviously less intense version of moral injury that I think many of us carry. And the more we work to try to not see that, I think the more we take out of ourselves in terms of psychic and moral and intellectual and spiritual energy. So that's sort of how I want to take it on. I want to take it on as this question of, is moral injury like trauma collective, and is it transgenerational? If it is those things, then America has a lot to reckon with. I mean, all Americans have a lot to reckon with. We all live on stolen land. We all benefited by stolen labor. And the more we deny it, I think the further we get from any kind of peaceful society. I think a lot of our very toxic politics have to do with the fact that we're actually reaching a point where we can't swallow any more of these sins, the sin eaters at weddings. We've been eating sins for centuries. I think you can only eat so many. And then things start to go haywire. And I think a little bit that's what's happening to us in this moment.
You said so many important things right now in one go. I just want to highlight a few things. Like, first of all, it touches me how much it touches you, because I feel like the depth of your depth speaking also in, even if some of the things are things that you're still finding out, but deeper inside, I feel a strong drive that this is very important, and this reaches me, like the depth of your essence speaking here, and that these matters are important. And I think also when you spoke about the privilege, and that many of us have certain levels of privilege, we also have a responsibility. And I think when you spoke about looking and how much, and also let's stay now in, like, globally, but let's stay in the US society, like how much is being kind of invisible and not known as a defense to what you said, I think is true, that the moral injury, in my understanding, what I have seen in the intergenerational work, it's definitely intergenerational, and it's definitely we have much more work to do, and we need a different system in the society, that we can process these things differently than we do it now. And you said another thing that I want to highlight is, the less we look at it, the more chaos we will experience in the society. And I think all of these things are very, very wise, and I think should be heard by many, many people, because I think we really have to go and look voluntarily before we look when there is a massive crisis. And anyway, the crisis is already here. I mean, I think we are living in a crisis. And so, yeah, I love everything you just said. It's very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really going against the American grain right now, because if you look at the loudest voices in public life in this moment, they are the voices of pushing forward at all costs, an aggressive view of how interactions should occur. And so apologies are really not respected. They're not respected for the courage that real apologies take. And guilt is not thought of as an actual, real visceral thing that is not a stupid thing to feel. And it's kind of a little stupid not to feel it for some things. And so like the outer world in our society, in this country right now, is so coarse, so hard, so unbending. And I really feel the need to at least make some space for the credibility that comes with bending, that the incredible gift it is to choose to bend.
Yes, I agree. I very much agree. And I think, like, collectively, we don't understand that if we slow down for a moment, if we create spaces to digest, if we reckon with our past, if we allow the changes in society that need to happen as a consequence. We cannot just reconcile the past and stay the same today. We're like, reconciling the past means we become somebody new that we all don't know. It's like, not we are restoring backwards, we are restoring into a future that we don't know. And if we don't, I think, and then we see, wow, actually what we were afraid of, that we will lose something, the opposite's gonna happen. We will actually all win when we restore our past. But if we don't do it, we will actually more and more go into a downward spiral.
Beyonce, being a very wise woman, has a line at the beginning of American Requiem, which is, for everything to stay the same, it needs to change again. And I think that's a really beautiful place to start a song with a name like American Requiem, because there's so much about mourning in American life right in this moment, and especially African American people know this better than anyone. And the idea that we are grasping so tightly to what is currently true, and even squeezing with all our might to hold it where it is. And the harder you squeeze, history, the more it oozes between your fingers, you
Mhm.
know, you know, and so you're watching it happen in places like Florida where they've made it illegal to talk about race history in the classrooms when there's enormous history to be studied and benefited by. You know, it's amazing that guilt is dismissed as sort of a weak emotion
Mhm.
when they're fighting so hard so that nobody ever feels it. That feels to me like a little bit of a confession of how powerful and how much it asks of you. The fear is of guilt and the recognition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Again, I agree completely. And I have taken thousands of people into reconciliation
Mm,
processes with their past in different cultural fields. And every time we did it, even if it's not easy, even if it's, we go through difficult emotions and difficult processes, but at the end of the day, it feels like you're closer to yourself, you're more intimate with yourself in life, and
yeah.
you have better relationships, and you feel that you reconciled something and you grew, you matured.
Mhm.
And I think that's exactly what we need now. We need more mature societies to
Yeah.
strengthen our democracies, and I don't think there's any way without reconciling the past, because that fragmentation, and look, when you look at social media at the moment, like how much
Mm.
fragmentation, how much
Uh,
war, like war is
yeah.
going on.
Yeah. The more we fragment, the more war and violence in general feels like the only answer to every question. If,
Right.
you know,
Right.
if we could actually look at the Middle East and see, oh my gosh, we're basically the same people with a shared history. That's very simplistic. I understand, but even at the same time, um, we are solving every problem with a hammer,
Mhm.
and we have so many more tools if we would stop to take stock.
Mhm. Mhm. In your own experience, when you started to look at your own family history, how do you want to speak a little bit about
Mm.
how you experienced it, and what's the learning maybe that came out of them?
I I was um I was in Selma, Alabama, on a trip with a group of church people, and we were just sort of experimenting with the idea that we could do reconciliation trips across the South with conservatives and liberals and so forth. And I had never been to Selma before. It's a really extraordinary place of pain. It's not a place where that redemptive story dominates at all. That was one afternoon, and the rest of history in Selma has been just damaging and ugly. As in one example, it was 1965, the March in Selma. The mayor in 1965 was still the mayor in 2000. That is how long that same guy and that same sheriff were in charge in this place where when you speak to Americans about Selma, they kind of get a little misty eyed and think of it as this great victory. But it's this forgotten place. Anyway, so I was going through this experience that this woman had set up because it was a big slave trading outpost as well as a lot of other things before the Civil War. And she had created this experience of what it would have been like to be on a slave ship. So it's in this extremely dark room, and you're you're in there with strangers and getting pushed together and so forth. It was hard. And I came out of there and my phone rang as soon as I came out of there. And I had sent a question to my cousin who does a lot of the research about the family about like what was the name of the town and how many people were owned. And that was when she called me when I came out of there. She
Mm.
said, "This is Delil, Mississippi. And in the last census, there were about 24 people. And they weren't people with names. They were people with genders and ages, and that's all. The 1850 census had about 12 people, so more people had been added. So, to say that I experienced it in my body is to say it very lightly. And,
Mm.
it just came with me and I carry it with me still. It feels, I don't know. I keep running up against this space of no language. When I try to describe why it feels so important to look at it squarely, it just feels like I'm not living my purpose in life unless I really tell myself and the people around me truth. about what was happening there.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's very true. And you said it because many people might think, oh, it's my body is like a separate entity, but
Mm,
actually our body is a whole context of
yeah.
ancestors. And when there's
Oh, yeah.
something, when there are some ethical transgressions, we feel we
Mhm.
cannot be embodied and live our full purpose without
Mm,
restoring what lives deeply in the
mm,
soil of our bodies. Our bodies
mm.
know, and that's what you said. Like I
Yeah.
felt it very strongly in my body, and I think,
Yeah.
and I have heard this thousands of times,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same sentence, and so
Yeah.
that's very powerful.
I've always carried everything in my stomach. I don't know why, just
Mhm.
always in my stomach. And so when I'm not feeling well, when I'm happy, it's in my stomach. Either one. My cousin, who's done a lot of this research, had started just sort of inspecting who had skin cancer in the family because she had skin cancer that she was fighting. And she went all the way back to this great, however many greats grandfather in Alabama, whose daughter married the guy who was living in Mississippi. And he was the most notorious slave owner in Alabama. He was just awful and famously evil. And he had skin cancer so badly that his entire cheek had been cut off, so that he had this face. And I mean, if William Faulkner had written it, you would say, "Oh, come on, Bill, you're like taking it a little too far there," because the vividness and the reality of the way the body, is reflecting the damage, the horror, the evil, the toxicity of
Mhm.
what was going on. Which is not to say that people with skin cancer deserve what they get, but the visual image of him had to have been horrifying to the people he was buying and selling. He must have been terrifying.
Mm.
And it felt like a scene from a Faulkner novel.
Mm. Yeah, it's important what you just said also that not everybody who has
Yeah.
some health issues, that's
Yeah.
the reason.
Yeah.
And obviously there our bodies are very sensitive,
Mhm.
biocomputers, and
Yeah.
we carry a lot of our history. History is not gone. This like unintegrated history
Yeah.
is the past that travels with us,
Yeah.
and you described it beautifully. And so how does this inform you today? Like the first of all, I think it's very courageous that you do this at all because
Mm.
many people, don't have the courage to look.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
you started, okay, even if it's uncomfortable, even if I don't know what I'm going to find, I will look.
Mm. Yeah.
And so how does this inform you today?
I feel like we must all look at our lives and ask ourselves, are we uniquely placed? Is there some way in which I'm uniquely placed? And I feel very uniquely placed, because I've been so advantaged and so forth. But not just in that sense. I feel like I had an inside view of the way people in certain ways of life think. Um, as an example, I can remember my mother standing over me at 9 years old when I was reading my history textbook and objecting to the way that the slave owners were being described in my history book. And she said, "Well, as Yankees, they always lie to you. That most of the slave owners were very nice to their slaves, and when at the end of the war they wanted to stay with their owners because I mean this is classic lost cause ideology." But she was passing it along to me as truth, and a bigger truth and better truth than what was being told to me by my history textbook. That is, I think, part of the mechanism by which moral injury gets passed. It gets passed through lore and belief and so forth. Um, I lost my thread. What's the second half of that sentence? What was the second half of that question?
Like how would you experience like what you learned in your own inner research? How does this
Right,
inform you today?
right. So what I'm understanding is I'm reading Isabel Wilkerson's book about caste right now, which is a
Mhm.
beautiful book. And the way she speaks from the inside of the experience of being of this reviled caste, it came to me that I know the inside of the experience of the other caste. I know what it sounds like inside of one of these families. I know what it looks like in terms of the way people treat each other and behave. And I'm not interested in telling a horrible expose kind of story. Actually, kind of the story I want to arrive at is I love my mother. I loved her. She was a really wonderful, funny, fabulous person who also did these things. It wasn't her essence. And maybe there are people for whom that's their essence, but I think the large majority of even people doing the worst things, that's not who they are. And so I was raised on a lot of those kinds of moments where, as a child, I remember looking at my mother that day and saying, but mom, they were slaves. And so I got it, which I'm proud of at 9. I was able to have the wherewithal to push back and to say that and to see that, because not everybody can. So I'm proud of that. But, you know, I've heard so much worse. And what I feel like is I don't know where to store that. Do you know? I mean, my grandmother especially said some horrible, horrible things as I was growing up. And even as a child, I would feel myself go, like that. You know, it was like, whoa, that was so hateful. And she was wonderful. Also, she took such good care of my grandfather when he had a stroke. She took care of him until the day he died. And she, you know, she was loyal and she was kind and she was funny. So I'm trying to figure out how do I arrange myself around, like, I need to hold these truths. I need to hold them. I will not let them go because they are true.
Mm.
But I also need to hold that I loved my grandmother and I loved my mother, and these things can exist both at the
Mm.
same time. You know, I have a unique view of it because a couple of times I've been public criticizing my Uncle Walt. There's a well-documented history of racism and anti-Semitism. It's like, I can't even believe I have to explain to people that it exists, but just go see Song of the South. That's all you need to know. So anyway, I won't make that argument, but in the times that I have criticized him publicly, the blowback I've gotten from complete strangers, people who never met him, didn't know anything about him, just fans, has been shocking. I mean, it's really people calling me names, horrible names, and just telling me I should burn in hell. I mean, really the worst kind of internet trolling in defense of this guy. So why? The question is why? And I think it's because most people feel that what I'm actually saying is you should hate yourself, because I'm telling you to hate Walt. And if you loved Walt, then you loved what he did and you enjoyed all the things that he made, then you should hate yourself. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is look at it. Look at it for what it really is. Nobody's telling you you can't enjoy the Jungle Book. But at the same time, I mean, Baloo is funny and they're all funny, but you know, it was from some of the most racist source material he ever used from Rudyard Kipling. And there is a deep message in there that people should stay with their own kind. And he made it in the middle of the 60s during the height of the civil rights movement. It's really hard for me to pretend that all of that isn't contained in Jungle Book, even if it's a very enjoyable film. And I've had African American people say to me, don't diss Walt. We love Walt. You can't criticize him for this, because they don't know what to do with that either. So I feel like I've been wrestling with this for so long, this question of what do we
Mm.
do with the hateful things that are inside of each of every one of our histories. How do we own them? How do we tell ourselves the truth about them and still contain love and
Mm.
acceptance of the people who bring it into our lives?
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. First of all, it's very fascinating to listen to you and to the also the complexity of your life story. I think it's very, very interesting. And what again, what touches me is the your willingness to keep going and to keep going deeper. This feels very resonant in me. I can
Mm,
feel it very much in I want to go to the root of this. And of course it's step by step, but I feel you're
mm,
very committed to that uh,
mm,
movement.
mm,
And you said something very interesting because you know, light and dark or good and evil are like when we polarize into shadow, it's like it needs to be either one or the other.
mhm,
And then,
mhm,
but that's very dangerous because that's where we exactly create these posters of life, these
mhm.
2D posters that we try
Yes,
to feel safe in. It's much more
yes,
challenging to say, wow, I feel love, and there was a lot of hatred.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
that's much more challenging, and it needs
much
much more
more.
maturity to
Yeah,
post this in oneself and not try
mm,
to polarize the tension.
right,
You know,
right,
because
right.
if you cannot be with the tension, you need to identify yourself with a pole. Either I'm on
Yeah.
this side or on this side.
Yeah.
But if you have enough consciousness to host the tension and you don't need to reject it, you say, yes, this feels like a tension in me. And
Mhm.
all of this is part of life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that when I say there is love, I agree to the hatred.
Mhm.
It's like that a mature perspective can host contradiction and work with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's so
Yeah.
important. And that's what you also described about your fans, because then it sounds like, oh, you are telling them in the less mature perspective, it sounds like you're telling them to hate themselves for all this stuff,
Right.
but that's not what you're saying. But that's
Yeah.
also what a mature perspective wouldn't hear.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's this like visceral response, and I think what Walt offered in the things that he made was an image of America back to itself. You know, and it was a very benign, benevolent image of America, and people loved that story. And what he offered people also were these polar choices. The bad guys are always very clearly bad guys, and there's no complexity to them. And how many bad guys are really like that? That's a standard Hollywood thing. They give us the Nazi and the Boer and the and the Southern white supremacist, and they're always the same. In the movie The Help, the woman who's a white supremacist, she's bad because she also treats her children badly, and she also does all these other things. So that the idea is that she just carries evil with her in every single way, and that's just not the way it works. But you use this language 2D, which is interesting to me because that's how I'm thinking of it. I think that because I'm very interested in these stories of people who turn out to have been much more complicated than we thought. So, George Washington turns out to be a terrible, terrible slave owner who did a lot of cool things. I think it's interesting that Florence Nightingale, we think of as this benign nurse who was nice and everything, what she went through to go to Crimea and to deal with the soldiers was basically the nurses at that time they were called camp followers, and they were basically prostitutes. And she risked, her status, say what you want about wanting that status, but as a lady in society to do the benign thing. And so she's thought of as this kind of obvious person. So when Henry Dunant, who was a very good friend, proposed the formation of the International Red Cross, she opposed him.
Mm-hmm.
And she opposed because she wanted the soldiers to be treated and she wanted the hungry to be fed. But she said, if you form an agency that feeds and takes care of people, then there's going to be no reason for any government to ever stop doing this. And it's just going to get worse. And I think of that as such a morally sophisticated, complex thinking piece of decision making that she had. And we think of her as this like nice lady. And I call it the IKEA effect because like you go to IKEA, you buy a bookshelf and a bookshelf is shaped like this in the real world, but you get this flat box. And that's what we do when people die was we just unfold them and put them back in that flat box so that they fit on the shelf just right. They don't stick out in any inconvenient ways. They don't ask you any questions. And we've done it like Helen Keller, who was a fierce anti-war activist and a very feisty left-wing socialist. Everybody thinks of her as this kind of nice old lady, who was blind and deaf. And the minute she started speaking up, people said, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just being led astray by her nurse. And I think it's a big problem that we have in America of a particular form of emotional immaturity that is not exclusive to Americans, but it does characterize our public life.
Yeah, I'm very happy we're speaking about this, or like what it takes to host this complexity, to let these contradictions or let these tensions within people, within communities, like coexist, because that's much more challenging also to our ethical maturity than if we can say, okay, this is good and this is bad. And
Right.
it's much easier because it doesn't require a relationship. But what we
Yeah.
are talking about requires much more relationship. You need to be much more related and grounded in yourself, because relationship doesn't mean that you agree to these things. The opposite. You can be very clearly opposing certain values or certain actions or certain whatever aspects but
Yeah.
you are not disrelated. And then I
Yeah.
think we are also much more effective in changing our society
Mhm.
versus
Mhm.
creating these kind of boxes, and then we
Mhm.
cannot talk to each other, and that's why we cannot transform
Right.
together.
Right. Right.
And
Well,
and
if you
the
look, oh,
yeah, go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
If you look at the primary political and social polarizations in this country, it really is between people who really are in flight from complexity, and on both sides. And they're really looking for the world to be divided up into two types of people, which we know there are two types of people: the people who think there are two types of people, and then people who know it's complicated. And increasingly, for instance, when Florida says you can't teach this kind of history, what they're looking to do is to close off all the escape valves and the escape hatches, so that then we're all walking the same straight line together, and it feels very clear. And it's a flight from reality, yes, but it's also this terrible narrowing, and it's an atrophy of this muscle we all need, which is the muscle that
Mhm,
holds complexity. And the
mhm,
more you use it, the better it becomes and the stronger it becomes. And I mean, I don't, I don't know how to live in that kind of narrow binary world. It's a very inhospitable place.
mhm.
And so
Exactly.
I think that's part of the reason why trans issues, for instance, are so important right now in the public life, because feminists have always been sort of pushing in the direction of, can we please take off the strictures on gender roles? Even if they weren't necessarily talking about trans issues, they were attacking the gender binary. And so it could only have taken us to this place logically. So yeah, what would happen if there were no gender binary? Would we all fall
Mhm,
apart and die? Or would we just take each person at, at what they present themselves to us to be? And why do we need to know more than that, in the short term? So I think one of the reasons that's really getting under the skin of the right wing in this country is because it goes against everything, that they really need to believe, which is that the world is easily divided into two categories in 100 different ways.
mhm. Yeah, and it also confronts, of course, on the one hand, some spiritual concepts, and it also confronts us with our own inability to be related to us. Like all the parts where I'm not at home in myself, I need to kind of make more strict or rigid in the world, or they are
Mhm.
more chaotic. But when we know
Mhm.
from trauma, either it becomes very rigid or it becomes
Yeah,
chaotic
yeah,
and disorganized. And
yeah.
I think what we see is like in and also what you said about like restricting history, these kind of things never last. We
Yeah.
cannot suppress. Yeah, it will last for some time, but it will have to break open, and then the only choice is a crisis, a major disruption, more pain, because
Yeah.
we can't clean the past that
Mhm.
is very painful. That doesn't work. And I think we throw enough painkillers on discomfort
Yeah.
and try to keep our
Yeah.
cities clean, and all the rest is somewhere where we don't see it. I mean, this doesn't work.
Mm.
We know this.
Mm.
And so I think what you're talking about is so important. How can we motivate our culture? And I think very strongly that we need to create an architecture in the
Mm.
country or in countries around the world
Mm.
where we have a mainstream architecture. Like there are hospitals, we call it the medical system, and
Mhm.
that's where you get medical care. But we need another kind of architecture that is the collective integration process of the
Mhm.
legacy of every nation. And
Right.
then US has its own, Germany has its own, Latin America has its own legacy, but we need a system where we can, process that as a
Yeah.
as a citizen's responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And without that, I think we keep repeating all
Mm.
this fragmentation, as you
Mhm.
said.
Well, that's why the economic damage over the last 50 years of everything that started in the 70s and then with the Reagan administration, it feels like I'm just talking about like mundane politics. But actually, what happened over that time was the takeover, the absolute capture of the imagination of this country by the idea that we're all individuals. That's what's underneath every
Mhm.
single piece of damaging legislation and corporate ideology that we're now reaping the whirlwind from now. And, the idea that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps is comedy, actually, try it. You can't do it. It can't be done. And in the 19th century, it was an expression that was used to define something that was impossible to do. So it is, it's frightening to me how much we've managed to sell people this notion that they're alone. And it's why one of the reasons moral injury is such an important thing to study, because the only thing that seems to help, because there's no medicine, there's no specific therapy. The only things that help are working in groups and talking spiritually. I mean, for the Pentagon, of all places, to acknowledge there's such a thing as moral injury and to hand it to the chaplain corps. The chaplain corps. This is, the Pentagon we're talking about. This is the most, left-brained, rational thinking thing in the world. For them to say, chaplains, we're out of ideas and the suicide rate is so bad, we really need to talk about this. That is like the Pentagon saying that war is a spiritual problem.
Which it
That's
is. Exactly.
that should have been a seismic moment, when they decided to
Yeah.
do this, because that really is like the least spiritual entity acknowledging that there's such a thing as spirituality, that it exists.
That
And
is
what's really interesting these days about moral injury is they're doing fMRI studies now that show it showing up in a totally different part of the brain. Have you read about this? It's very interesting. So it shows up in the precuneus, which is the part of your brain that's in charge of sort of remembering the things that have happened, recalling episodic memories, putting together for you the story of your life, your identity, who you are. I can't think of a better word than conscious.
mm,
And we lost in the last 20 years a little over 8,000 people to combat, but we lost over 30,000 people to suicide.
absolutely.
That's an astonishing number. And that should scare the life out of all of us in terms of what it is we think we're doing as a country.
Yeah, and I also think I say this often in my talks also, I think the way we deal with war is actually, first of all, is part of the hypnosis of the individual that you spoke about,
Yes.
because there's such an overemphasis on individual, which I think if there are many people in our society that live in pain because of the system that we created, then being open to that and feeling interdependence is almost not possible, because so we need to protect ourselves to not feel what we're actually creating every day. So that's, I think, one element of this hyper individualism. And the other one is, when you look at armies, I often say, I think our societies do not understand that the weight of war doesn't rest just with the soldiers. It rests with every single citizen of the country. So if the army goes to war, the residue needs to be carried by everybody. But we don't have those. We don't have any rituals. We don't have any awareness process, like how war affects the entire society of a country. And
Yes.
because we don't have that, it gets compressed into the people that were actually in combat or that actually suffered a moral injury. And that is completely out of balance. I think that the wars are collective events that affect collectives. And we need a much deeper understanding of that. And that will relieve some of the suicidality, because it actually becomes like a shared responsibility. But the other side of it would be, we would all stand up much more and say, no, that war is not going to happen,
Yeah.
because we know what's the impact.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
peace is an outcome of a collective understanding of
Yes.
war.
Yeah. And a lot of the people I talk to who deal a lot in moral injury describe veteran moral injury as a terrible and unjust allocation of the appropriate level of guilt for
Exactly.
what's happening.
Exactly.
And this is true for people who work in slaughterhouses and people who do all kinds of other morally injurious jobs. We just look the other way and say, take care of that for me. But we are asking them to carry so much. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is such a fascinating character for me, because when he was arrested, it was because he had willingly decided to become part of a plot to assassinate Hitler. And for me, knowing what a Christian he was and how committed to nonviolence he was and what a pacifist he was, I feel like there's no greater sacrifice I can imagine than stepping into what would sincerely feel to him like throwing his eternal soul to away, because that's what it would have been for him to kill Hitler, even Hitler.
Mm.
And what an extraordinary act of love it would be to offer up your eternal soul for
Mm.
everyone else. And that is an appropriate way of understanding the moral injury of one act. That is him understanding the gravity of it. I was in North Korea a few years ago on a peace mission with a bunch of women activists. It was fascinating. We had a meeting in North Korea with a bunch of women who were still alive and had survived the Korean conflict. And of course, the Americans were in the North doing what all soldiers do in all conflicts. It's not Americans are particularly bad, but they're no better than any other army attempting to occupy a space. And so, I've been in a million of these circles because I've traveled to conflict zones and spoke with women. And so these women set up a circle and they told us about this horrible thing that happened and that horrible thing happened and so forth. And I couldn't shake the feeling something was really interesting about this. And then it came to me that, oh my gosh, this war was in the late 40s, early 50s, and it's alive for them. It's still alive. Try coming to this country and asking an American what happened in the Korean War. We've been at war almost nonstop since that day. It's not alive for us in any of these conflicts. We're not holding the reality of these conflicts. And it is so much to our peril that we pretend that nothing is happening.
I love this. I mean, Abigail, I see our time, so we'll slowly come to an end. But I would love maybe to have a second part to
I
this
would love that. I mean,
conversation.
the time has just flown by.
It's just, yeah, right. It's like boom, and almost an hour passed. And
Yeah.
because I think there are so many aspects, sub aspects of what you spoke about, and especially to dive deeper into the moral injury. I would love that, and also
Yes.
seeing the what are restoration or repair processes, and what's the spiritual dimension. Maybe to talk more about what you just said, the unconscious denial of the war memories in our societies. And I think there's so much more to talk about, but it needs a
Yes.
little bit more space. So I would love that. If there's anything that you want to leave us with, please. And
Um, I, I think we should always leave room for the possibility that we might be wrong
mhm,
in whatever it is. And that certainty is the enemy here. We really need to be suspicious of certainty wherever, what shape it takes. If we can learn to be more pliant and to learn from each other more, I think we would build a far more peaceful society.
mhm. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a real joy, and I feel there's so much more coming through us, both of us, in
Yeah.
the conversation. So we should
Yeah.
definitely continue. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mm.
To learn more about Abigail and her work, visit abigaildisney.com and americandreamdoc.com. Bayo Akamalafe, PhD, is a widely celebrated international speaker, posthumanist thinker, poet, teacher, public intellectual, essayist, and the author of We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. He is also the visionary founder of the Emergence Network and host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains.
Let's speak a little bit about movement. You said something before that I really loved. Is like I'm paraphrasing now, but you said something I'm hesitant to stabilize myself behind through terms. That's a
Yes.
lovely way to say it. I love that. And but then also it seems like there's an impact on some kind of movement. And when I
Yes.
listen to you, I get a deep sense of movement.
Yes.
And maybe you can speak a little bit to the dimension of movement, because it seems like spirituality is somehow connected to some sort of movement when I listen.
Yes.
And maybe
Yes.
you can speak a bit deeper to that.
I mean, it's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and locating an piece of matter in space-time. That the moment you try to locate it, you lose a sense of other kinds of measurements. If you can determine its speed, then you lose a sense of location. If you determine its location, then you don't know how fast it's traveling. There's a sense of um, complementarity that is at work here. But the gist is that everything moves, and the world is movement. Even the individual, which is often stabilized as uniquely and exclusively independent, is a concatenation of movements, viral, microbial, ancestral. We're not put together as much as we are a coming together and a falling apart simultaneously, right? So the modern tries to locate us. Its gist, its most overriding imperative is to locate the self in a final way. And this leads to troubling realities like racialization and colonization and extractivism and neoliberalism. It leads to these very troubling kinds of dimensions, even pathologization, right? That this is a proper subject and this is an improper subject. This person is autistic, therefore inadequate, and this person is neurotypical, therefore a proper person. Lacan, thought about language and identity in very, very stabilizing ways. That in order to think, you need language. And if you don't have language, then you're an improper self, which of course totally banished the intelligence of autistic children and autistic people at the time that he was speaking. Of course, that gave rise to the work of Deligny, but that's a different point. So it seems here, brother, that I cannot but think in terms of movement. The world is chaos. The world is difference. And this difference precedes identity or language. And we're in constant negotiation with the world around us. And I'm not even talking about in linguistic terms. I'm talking about the ways our skins are navigating and conducting experiments at different dimensions with the world around us. We are even seated in some kind of conversation with evolutionary pathways and paradigms. Even just to have a drink of water is to ignite pathways across space-time, right? Across species, across multi-dimensions of how, drinking a cup of water is the creation and the demise of worlds, right? It's the death and the birth of worlds simultaneously. So this is quite overwhelming for if you're a clerk in an office space in a cubicle and your work was to put everything in a file, you would be overwhelmed if things were spilling constantly, right? Spillage is I think in my understanding of things, a very, very terrible crisis, a scandal to the modern, right? But that's what seems to be happening every time. The psyche is not still. The psyche is not within. The psyche is ecological and is moving. And there's no way to come to terms with the world without noticing how it moves, how it shifts. And that's how I think about the spiritual. I don't think about the spiritual as a different realm, that interrupts the material over time or sometimes. That feels very, very mechanistic and modern. The Yoruba people did not have that kind of conception, which is very interesting to me. They thought about spirits as living in the material realm because spirits are only finer kinds of bodies, right? So the spiritual is still the mysterious material. It's queer materiality. It's how the world refuses to be still.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And again, like I want to say, I said this also last time that I love the flow of your words, your eloquence, how you put words into a movement. That's already a sign when I listen to you. It induces in me like a movement, it induces in me
Mm,
rhythm. And
mm,
I'm joining a movement that you form through your words. It's like joining like when two rivers flow together and they create water patterns. So
beautiful.
that's how I feel when I listen to you. And I
That is
deeply
good
enjoy
feedback.
this. It's like it's kind of playing in my neurons as music. So it's lovely. So thank you. And first of all, I so much resonate with many things that you just said. I think
Yes.
also that it's the beauty in the movement and the beauty in being more and more able to participate in the movement that's unfolding versus trying
Yeah.
to control that movement from the past,
Yes.
to
Yes.
be like able to open up to the movement that's happening and
Yes.
immerse oneself in it and be able to be in this. I love what you said about the we are constantly like being, you said it differently, but being updated and in a deep exchange with the movement that's happening. That's different from
Yes.
a preformed cup that is kind of walking
Yes.
through life. And
Yes.
that's also when I speak about that we need to open the context, this moment that we are in. Like we cannot anymore stay with methodologies that are merely addressing our personal and childhood development. It's much bigger than that. There is an ancestral
Mm,
dimension, there is a collective dimension, and they're all interplaying. They're not separate. Oh,
mhm.
today we look at this, and then we look at that. So,
Yes.
and I'm wondering um, if you want to speak a bit more about, I mean, I'm also very interested to learn from you about some of the principles of African spirituality and the depth of the spirit speaking in that voice or that form. And I don't know if that's something you want to go into, but I would love to hear more. You started already to share a few principles before, but um, to speak a little bit more about how healing's being viewed, how disease is being viewed, like how what you said before, pathologizing or
Yeah.
non-pathologizing views of life
Yeah.
and how life's emerging all the time. So
Yes.
if you can speak a little bit from that voice, or your connection to the depth
Yes.
of the spirituality. Yeah.
Well, maybe the first thing I'll say is that there are as many African mythologies and systems around these matters of concern as there are Africans or as there are African cultures. So it would be impossible to speak about, of course, all of them, since there are many Africans within Africa. I do feel compelled to say a few things about some of those that I've been exposed to, like the Igbo cosmologies of harmony restoration, which was beautifully put together by one of my supervisors, a professor, while I was doing a PhD, Professor Peter Ebigu. And he kind of convened the idea of harmony restoration, reading into Igbo cosmology, the idea of disharmony being a discontinuity or rupture that separates us from the spiritual, right? And the spiritual, of course, is a deeper intensity of the everyday. Okay. Um, so he would, they would speak, I'm not going to break down the entire system here, but of course, there is a sense in which harmony is designated as a quadrant or something that looks like a four-angled shape, which is a motif that appears throughout Igbo culture, right? In fact, before the um, British missionaries came, the Igbos had a 4-day week, right? A 4-day week. Everything stands properly on fours in that conceptualization. Fours is stable. So when it becomes three and when it becomes a binary, when it becomes one, it means many things at many different levels, right? Some of the ways that this is noticed is that you're cut off from community. If there ever comes a time where you are cut off from your people, you're cut off from your name, you're cut off from sharing a cola nut in the morning, you're cut off from the sweltering heat of greeting each other or sharing a meal, then you become sick. Notice that sickness has nothing to do with the person itself, but has everything to do with paradigms and territories and force fields, right? So that the work then is, how do we restore you to the community? How do we restore you to eating well? How do we restore you to having communion with the plants around you? How do we restore you to praying to your chi, which is your God, or to your ancestor? How do we restore you to giving sacrifices well? Right. So this is a very, very communal way of holding space for people. That wasn't about fixing you. It's not about your issue. It's about what it is doing to the village. The village is the individual, not the isolated self. That brings me to the Yoruba people too. I studied with healers, and one of the things that I noticed, the Yoruba healers or Babalawos, one of the things that I would notice is how they displaced the individual in the act of what you might call in conventional therapeutic settings, the intake interview, right? Getting a sense of the client, recording the data, so tell me about yourself and all those things and and ahas that we're trained to do, right? Yeah, you know the drill. And so, you know, they didn't practice the head nodding, distancing elitism that I later that I was trained in as a psychotherapist. They were less bothered about me as they were about the people around me, as they were about the invisible. It's as if their posture was like, who are the others here? Right? Who are the other people here? Who's your auntie? Who's your uncle? Where do you actually come from? Did your village eat well today? It's more about also that sense that we are lineages. We are the self or the subject or the subjectivity is not the isolated highway. It's a milieu. It's it's an entire zeitgeist that is called into the space, right? And so the idea wasn't to try to get to fix you. And that was even more emphasized when they recommended, you know, interventions. They would say something as crazy as, at least to me, who was interviewing them and speaking with them and listening to them, they would say something like, how about you bring a goat and we kill that goat together, and you drop the blood of the goat in this river or something like that. And you would say, how does that have anything to do with my feeling depressed? How does that have anything to do with? And yet to them, the world wasn't just this mechanistic cause and effect machine. It was, it was something more vibrant than cause and effect. It was a spilling together where the minutest or the remotest um, artifact of being is in solidarity, a strange, sensuous kind of solidarity with the things that you're presenting with in a healing context. So already that vocation of the public interrupts the interiority of the private. The spirituality from African cosmologies, the ones that at least I've spoken to, are they gesture towards the public. They gesture towards the trans public. They don't situate the individual as well as Western paradigms do.
Yeah, that's again like music, and I love because, and most probably also because we, and for a long time we have been fixated in a way as society so much on individual development. It feels
Mm-hmm.
like a breath of fresh air to open that up and feel, oh wow, there is a whole mm, like world and context that's so important for well-being. And well-being is not in a locus, it's not in a location, it's kind of living as the relationships that are flowing
Yes.
through us. and
Yes.
and to me this feels like when I listen to you, it generates in me the feeling of oxygen. It generates in me the feeling of like, I can breathe again and I can exhale into the movement that is happening
Yeah.
anyway.
That is good to hear, brother. And the spaciousness is what's missing in our paradigms of justice and of healing today. We're kind of stuck and we're becoming a lot more brittle in the ways that we shape even ideas of safety, for instance. It's becoming increasingly conformist and proto-fascist. So if you don't adhere to pre-designated notions of identity, then there's something wrong with you. That creates the anxiety of categoricity. And that's what whiteness does well. White modernity, which is, again, as I've described to you, brother, in previous conversations, is not white people. That's whiteness doing its reductionism again. Whiteness is not white people, but it has been deployed as a speculative term in Black scholarship to think about the ways that the world is increasingly uniform in creating dissociation. And I think that that cutting away of our tentacular relations with ancestry, and ancestry not as a, when people hear ancestry, they often, well, this is not accusatory, and this is not a monolith of an idea, but it seems people think um, we take the step to connect to ancestry, and there's some truth to that. But whether you take the step or not, you are ancestral is the point. It's not a decision like, let me connect with ancestors. It's not a toolkit like I'm going to speak to an ancestor today. It's that you are the troubling continuity and discontinuity of matters that were never finished, right? Of questions that were never fully articulated, of answers that will never fully land, right? So the idea of let's get ourselves together where we can be fully whole and complete is already disjunctive. And no, that's not the word I want to say. Is already some kind of a rigid rupturing away that reinforces the modernity that I speak about.
Yeah, and it also, the notion, and I think that shows up in spirituality very often. It seems like there is an aim, and once I
Yes.
get there, everything will be good.
Yes.
And
Yes. It's a romanticization. Disney.
exactly, exactly. And I think that's very important. I mean, it's also what you just mentioned it yourself, that like the unwillingness to be in the fragility of a life that is scary at times cannot be
Yes.
fixed with
Yes.
an ultimate end of the story.
Yes.
But that's what we often perpetuate this notion in our
Yes.
society, and so,
Yes.
and I think, but if we can see more that the end of a perfect ending is a reflection of a lot of unsafe and a lot of scared parts of us, then I think then we become much more vulnerable in the relationship here, because
Mm,
then it needs
mm.
to be more solved here than there. The postponing
Yes.
of the solution doesn't
Yes.
work. So then it's
Yes.
it's about us and not about where we're gonna land. And
Yes.
I think that's very powerful. So yeah,
Yes.
I very much agree
Yes.
with it. Yeah.
It lends itself to the conceptualization of the spiritual bypass, and we can speak about that. How about we do that?
Yeah, how let's do that. Let's do that. So
Okay.
spiritual bypass. Maybe you give it a shot.
Uh, I mean, what word comes to mind? The song comes to mind is it's one about I'm just passing through this world. I forget the Christian song. We sang it about this world. We're just passing through. We're not. We don't belong here. We belong elsewhere. It's almost Elon Muskian in its aspirations that if we go to Mars, then the human as a colonial territory won't follow us. Machine guns won't follow us. We will arrive there and start on a clean slate. The clean slate is the problematic thing here. We start at the beginning or the end, or we end at the end. But we hardly ever live in the middle of things. The middle is noxious and disturbing. And I think the idea of you've already beautifully spoken to it, brother, without naming it that way. The idea of a bypass is, I think it's helpful to some degree in noticing the reductionisms at work. Like we kind of populate the spiritual with utopian sentiments, right?
Mm.
And so if only we can get there, yeah, then all things will be well. We're just passing through. I'm just a passing through, right? If only we arrive there, which is not to say that I mean, there's another element here that I don't want to go deep into, but the nihilism of Blackness is subtly expressed in the idea of a hereafter or an afterlife, right? And I recognize that as well. But there is also the sense in which people try to reduce, um, try to get aside the pain and the suffering and the immediacy of trouble by creating metaphysical safety, right? And with metaphysical safety, I can get aside, or I can bypass, as one would say. The other dimension to this, brother, is that bypassing is becoming a universal accusation,
Mhm.
and it's worrisome, right? It's that every attempt to outthink or rethink or reframe the linearities and the practices that we're used to is immediately amenable for that accusation. It's like, oh, you're doing spiritual bypassing. You're bypassing, but sometimes it's not bypassing, it's sidestepping the logic, right? It's sidestepping the logic of containment, right? For instance, calling healing into question and noticing the practices of healing which are not pure or which are not without trouble, but are entangled with ecological practices of that are linked and networked with suffering is not bypassing, and noticing that sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is not bypassing, it's sidestepping the logic, that we're used to. Right. So there is a sense in which we are gifted with a conceptualization that names something, and and then we take that name and we paint the town red with it. Right. Uh, Trauma wasn't such a big word decades ago. It's now the biggest word. Everyone's is traumatized these days. Right.
Mm.
And that is troubling to me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And I think you said something very interesting. You said like how bypassing the the word bypassing becomes the bypassing by putting it in a disrelated way onto certain actions, because attunement and presence is also the discernment where we feel, oh, now somebody is actually in a disrelated way bypassing a certain dimension of life, but actually another person that does something that looks very similar is not bypassing, and the assessment lies again in the attuned relating, that I cannot have a fixed idea about bypassing, but I actually need to have a moment to moment to moment assessment of life. And that moment to moment assessment of life is a constant practice of presence, and is
Hmm.
so important because otherwise we end up in exactly what you said. And there is a kind of a fashionable word, but we are putting it like a poster on everything because
And
of the
everything.
very thing. We are doing the very thing that we are talking, that we are
Yeah.
saying.
I have half a mind for us right now, brother, in this conversation to institute a new word and call it double bypassing. But I fear that immediately we say double bypassing, that in itself will lead to a triple bypass.
Yeah, a blue city instead of a red city. Right.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. But that's beautiful, because again, like everything is either attuned and is in relationship, or is actually doing the very thing that it describes. Like
We're
and
doing the, yeah,
yeah.
we're repeating, we're using the epistemology and the resources of the very thing we're critiquing to critique. And therefore we become part of that, the conditionality of its sustenance.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very beautiful. Yeah. So thank you for that. That was a great reminder of how important it is to stay related in, and then that informs me what's bypassing and what not. But
Yeah.
it doesn't become
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thing by itself. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, Bayo, it's so lovely to talk to you. I mean, I feel very energized and I could go on for a long time, but I see our time. So, is there anything, like, given
Yes.
our conversation, that you want to mention before we conclude here?
Maybe I'll add something else. Jean Henri would speak about, and in a conversation, an interview he had that was called "The Hospital is Ill." Jean Henri was one of the early um, um, founders and operators of La Borde, which is where Deleuze, no, not Deleuze, Guattari and Deligny did some work post Second World War France. And he would say the hospital is ill. And I just want to use that to launch into a brief noticing that sometimes it is the case. We can speak about the spirituality of the individual. And by that, I mean all the forces and tensions and attentional spaces that give rise to the culture and to the worlding creativity of the individual with all its troubles attached. That spirituality is traveling now itself. That spirituality is breaking down and it's dissipating cracks in its architecture so that new forms of spirituality are emerging now, brother. And that's what I would think of as the spirituality of the cracks.
Mhm.
And the spirituality of the cracks is not about, it's not a dismissal of healing as a paradigm, as much as it is a troubling, a calling into question, right, of the individual as a monolith, the individual as the dissociated self. It's calling on different kinds of fidelities, different kinds of practices. And the only way we get there is collective experimentation, right? It's a politics of collective experimentation, whose legacies go back all the way to indigenous insights about the archetype of the trickster, that when things start to break and spill, you need to travel. Go with the tension, go with the trouble. If you stay put in your idea of I'm at home and I'm all good, I'm well, it's whole, then you might be frozen in that incarceral or carceral space. So I think, at least for some of us, hopefully for many of us, it's time to travel. It's time to travel. Home is no longer homely or hospitable. It's time to travel.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. And Bias, thank you so much. This is a great contribution to our community here, and I'm sure that many people will enjoy and really feel like moved by the movement of our conversation. So thank you so much. It's lovely to see you, and I
Thank you,
hope
brother.
for more conversations. And yeah, I
As
did
always.
enjoy. Yeah, right. As always.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
To learn more about Bayo and his work, visit bioakamalafe.net.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Haynes, and welcome to all of you who are joining. This is an integration session, so that's going to be a little bit of framing because we're going to do practice inside of this, somatic practice inside of it. So I'll give you a little bit of framing about why we're doing what we're doing, and then lead us in 3 practices. 2 will be standing and 1 will be seated, but you can also do them however you'd like to. So that's where we're headed today. I want to start with an image that I think helps understand embodied transformation. And when you look at this Venn diagram, the overlapping circles, what you see there in the middle is somatic awareness, somatic practices, and somatic opening, all within social context. So I want to break that down for a minute, especially when we're looking at collective trauma. And by that, we can mean the impact of systems of oppression, historical trauma, trauma that happens in a collective setting. But all of this is you can think of it as core components of embodied transformation or core components of embodied healing from trauma. So I want to just look at somatic awareness first. What that really is bring our attention to the language of the body, which is really sensation. Right? Sensations are always happening in present time. It's one of the quickest ways to get present again is notice what's happening in sensation. But with individual and collective trauma, sometimes our sensations are overwhelming. And we took on a whole lot of survival strategies to get away from sensation. So part of what we're doing inside of embodied healing is coming back to sensation and starting to feel and learn from and listen to the aliveness of the soma, or the aliveness of the body. Somatic practice, we're going to dive into some today in this integration session. And that is really looking at what are we practicing? And, we embody or we become what we practice. And is what I'm practicing or what we're practicing aligned with really our visions and our values? Is it aligned with healing or is it aligned with justice? So we'll be looking at somatic practices and some of the default practices we can inherit both from social systems as well as from collective trauma. So we'll get there. And then somatic opening is that third circle. And that really means the opportunity to uproot deep survival patterns or impact from individual and collective trauma, and some of how to work with that. So we'll just do a little process with that today that you can take home and keep working with yourself. This broader kind of gray circle that encompasses all of that we call social context. And really what I mean by that is, we're always living inside of economic and social conditions. And we're shaped by them, we're impacted by them. So much of collective trauma actually comes from our economic and social systems that are actually built on power over instead of power with. And one of the things that somatics really understands is that all humans have the need, right? The inherent need for safety, for belonging, and also for dignity or a sense of worth. We're social animals, so that belonging, that we can love and be loved, right? Be a part of is an essential part of our makeup. But when we live in social and economic systems that say only some groups of people are allowed or supported in safety, belonging, and dignity, and other groups are disallowed that systematically, that causes collective trauma. I even think at this point, in having worked for almost 3 decades with this, that most individual traumas are also caused by inequity or power over social systems. And even when we look at something as intimate as child sexual abuse, we have to find the root of child sexual abuse in something much, much bigger than an individual actor. Yeah. So social context is very important. And then you'll see the final circle we have is really land and spirit. And you can really call spirit whatever resonates for you. But our connection to land and our connection to something greater than us, even if we think of it as the ever-expanding universe, those are very big and important resilience factors for us as humans if we really look across the research, or we just look intimately in our own personal experiences or in some of our cultural experiences. So I want to just have this framework because as I go through these integration practices today, just gives you a sense of like what we're doing, what part does this play in embodied transformation and trauma healing, and kind of the come from. So cool, we're starting there. Okay, practice. I want to highlight for a minute the impact of collective trauma. And again, let me just give examples of this. It could be the historical trauma of colonization or slavery. Right? If we look at the racial justice uprisings, the last massive wave of them in the summer of 2020 in the United States that really went global, this is still a working with the history of slavery in this country and the anti-Black racism that's globally. And then we look at what happens. If we go Black Lives Matter, that is such a call for the safety, belonging, and dignity of all Black lives, right? That's what we're looking at. And then the collective trauma of not being granted that over centuries, right, at a systemic level. So when we look at collective trauma, we're going, what does collective trauma, what default practices does it leave us with? And we can think about like things like shame, right, or a sense of internalized oppression. It's like something's wrong with me or something's wrong with us, right? That's one of the impacts, and then that becomes embodied and we keep practicing it. Or for a lot of folks who've experienced collective trauma, we can be not hardly have any boundaries or be boundaried all the time, right? Those are ways that we're navigating safety or not. Or the same thing, we might go, I know how to love and be loved. Actually, I think that takes a lot of work for any of us, no matter what, right? But we can have real, like, I'm just going to open myself. I'm going to extend too much trust in a way to belong and then get hurt. Or I'm not going to extend any trust and not make contact and stay in isolation as a way, right? So often the default practices that trauma leaves us with is that our practices for safety, for belonging, and dignity can be at odds with each other because we're more in survival mode. Instead of having practices for what we might call in our work, I can have a centered boundary based on what I care about and what's important to me. I can actually practice giving and receiving love, not as an idea, but actually that can happen in my tissues. I know how to do that, right? There's a practice that we call hand on heart or hand on chest. That's a practice to help us relearn how to do that. So collective trauma leaves us with default survival strategy based practices. And why we do practices as a part of healing is that we can learn and embody new practices that actually serve our lives and our relationships and the things that are important to us. With all of that, let's do some practice together. I'm going to stand up. If that feels comfortable for you, please go ahead and stand up with me. If it doesn't, it's also fine to do this practice seated. All right. So the first practice we're going to do, it is a simple but oddly awesome for its simplicity practice. It's called a centering practice, and we're building somatic awareness through doing this, but we're also organizing ourselves in our bodies around what we care about at the same time. And centering practice with repetition, right? We really invite people to center on purpose 5 times a day. But it becomes like a place you can come back to where you're reconnecting with yourself, you're reconnecting with your aliveness, and you're reconnecting with what matters to you, right? So there's a way we can get sent off or even triggered and go, how can I come back to center, and have a way to do that? It's like a how-to. So sitting or standing, the first thing we're going to do is bring our attention into our aliveness or into our sensations. So go ahead and drop your attention into temperatures. What temperatures do you feel inside of yourself? It might be warmer or cooler, depending. But feel those from the inside out. You can also start paying attention to movement. There might be kind of twitching, or you're digesting, or a place you feel pulsing in your body. You might just notice your breath moving in and out, or your heart beating. Right? So movement in the body or in your soma. You can also feel for places where you feel more relaxed or more tense. Yeah, so all of these are guides to just come out of maybe our thinking self, or maybe we got removed from ourselves, and start to come back into your own aliveness, come back into your own skin and body. Good, so noticing for yourself, as we do this, it can help pragmatically to relax your eyes. Our eyes can get pretty fixed. And relax your eyeballs back into your sockets. Relax your eyes. And also relax your jaw at the hinge and also at the chin. So your teeth don't have to be clenched. There can be space between your teeth. And the last thing is right where your ribs are. You can even feel it for yourself. So you can just relax your diaphragm down a little bit. Right? These are all things that we can soften to let ourselves come more into our bodies. All right, then we're going to do the centering practice. And first I want to introduce you to center. So if you want to, you can put your thumb on your belly button and rest your hand underneath. So a couple inches below your belly button, this is what we're calling center. Yeah. See if what you can do is take a breath, bring your breath behind your center, and bring your attention behind center. Good. You can even bring yourself to center. Right? The more up we are, the more anxiety tends to run, the more we can drop down into gravity and weight ourselves or drop our attention down Physiologically, it's less possible to be anxious. Okay. All right. From center, we're going to center in 4 directions. So the first thing we're going to do is center and link. So what I mean by that is in this dimension of length, settle down from center into your lower body and lengthen up, making more space between your vertebrae at the same time. All right, so it's settling and lengthening and filling out into your full length. Right, there's many of the pressures of trauma that have us twist away or shrink up, right? What we're doing is we're reminding our nervous system, we're reminding ourselves that we can be in our full length. Inside of our length, we're also centering in dignity. Yeah? So recognizing our own inherent dignity and then recognizing that also in others. Yeah? So centering in length. The next direction is width. We're going to center in width. So from a center line here, widen. That might be inside. You can just feel the width of your shoulders. Widen out into the width of your ribs and hips. And just let yourself unfurl across the front and the back. You can also find a good balance left and right, whether you're standing or seated. Again, one thing trauma does is have us shrink, disappear, curl up. And this again is informing our tissues, informing our nervous system. It's okay to widen and come back into ourselves, find ourselves in current time. Centering in width. The thing about it is centering in the relational space. We can give ourselves out, let people in, have boundaries where we need to, but coming back into that belonging space. All right, third direction is depth. Backside, inside, front side. So let's put our attention on the back body. You might feel the back of your head or the space between the space between your shoulder blades. You might find your glutes, right, or your heels. Just find your back body in the space behind you. Just take a breath into that space. Then from your back body, start to come through your insides, include all your internal landscape, organs, tissues, all the way through to your front body. So what we're doing in this is like, can we add just 3 or 5 or 7% more space in our depth? Backside, inside, front side. And then a balancing back to front. We're not pulling back, but we're also not pushing forward. Just finding that good balance over our feet or over our hips. And be in depth, centering depth. Good, so centered in length, centered in width, centered in depth. Again, in the feeling self, right? Not just in concept, but in the feeling self. And the last thing we're going to center on is really who and what matters to you. In our work, we develop a declaration of what's important to us in our lives or in the future. But right now, just let yourself center in who matters to you and what matters to you. And that could be as close by as a family or community member, or it could be something like, I really care about climate justice and life on the planet. Whatever it is to you that compels you, center in that care and then let it inform your nervous system. Right? Let your longings be felt inside of you and inform your tissues. Now, of course, what we're getting to is we want what we most care about to inform our actions, right? Length, width, depth, what I care about, right? That's a centering practice. And while we maybe took 7 minutes, 10 minutes to do that today, once you get a repetition in, you can really do that in 30 seconds where it's like, feel myself, center in length and dignity, center in width and connection, center in depth, and center in what matters to me, right? It can take 30 seconds instead, right, with practice. This again becomes a place we can come back to when we get thrown off or tweaked or triggered. right? It's one of the things that we can do to feel, be present, come back. The last thing I'm going to offer inside of centering is often because of individual and collective trauma, we get kind of clogged up. And I want to remind you as we're centered that there's places for outflow or exits in the body. So the palms are a place we can consciously open and let things move through us, not just get caught in us. The bottom of the feet are the same way. We can let energy or aliveness or even emotion run down and out. Right? I always think of the earth. The earth is so amazing at composting and healing and reharmonizing. Another place is you can do the top of the head, just consciously open the top of the head a little bit, and that's another place energy or emotion can move. And then, of course, through our face, our voice, our tears, that's another place things come through. And lastly, the pelvis, right, running down. So there's outflows, and you might check for yourself, are those open enough that aliveness can also move through you? Yeah, rather than have to be managed inside of a system that is really built to let things move. Okay? All right. That was centering. I'm going to move on to the next practice, which is a consent practice. And I have to say, in my very long time and very many people of teaching somatically and working with people, everyone I've worked with, myself included, needs to relearn how to consent from a centered place or just get better at it. So I want to teach the consent practice because saying yes, no, and maybe based on what we care about, rather than based on social norms, what we should say, even what we may have inherited from our community or our families about who we should be and how we should act, right? All of that training lives so deeply in us. And again, with trauma and collective trauma, often our yes, no, and maybe gets taken away. Okay, so we want to practice it and embody it again and have it as a choice for ourselves. So I'm going to show you, you can try it on with me again, seated or standing. I'm going to show you the shapes of this and then we'll practice it, but you can try it on with me. So for standing, one foot in front of the other, just to have a good kind of stronger base. We're just going to take this shape for no. Yeah, no. We want to include our voices too and say it in your mother tongue. I'm teaching in English, but really say it in whatever is your original language. No. Right, that's the shape for no. You can switch feet, put the other foot in front, and your hands in front of you like this, making space, is maybe. Right, maybe. It doesn't have to be yes or no. Sometimes we need to think about it for a day or a year. Okay, maybe. That's a shape for maybe. And then your feet back side by side. Thumbs on top, open. This is yes. From a centered place, I'm opening myself and saying yes. Okay? So let's just try on these shapes again. One foot in front of the other. Try in the shape of no. From center, you're centered, you're in yourself, you're connected to what you care about. No, no, I don't want that. Right? Whatever words work for you, no. Switch legs, let's do that again. No. No, I won't. Good. Feeling that. Feel this shape. Feel this practice, right, in your soma. Okay, good. Change feet again. Let's just try on maybe. Just notice as we do this, which of these are familiar and which are like, ooh, I don't know. I don't think I have that embodied. Yeah, just feel maybe. And again, it's okay to have maybe last a long time. Yeah, maybe. And switch legs. Maybe. And stay in yourself, one foot depth. Okay. And again, let's do yes. Center, length with depth. Who and what do you want to say yes to? Yes. Yes. All right. We're running through this just on our own and briefly. But the next step we could take with this is that you imagine a real situation that's either a part of your healing from the past or that's part of your current day life. And that you could bring this practice with imagined content. And I'm going to ask you to not, start at a level 10 out of 1 to 10. Start at something that's more like a 4 or 5, because we want to get the repetitions into our bodies of this is a new choice, right? This is a new choice. In our work with some of the research that's behind it, what we see is it takes 300 repetitions of a new practice for muscle memory. It takes 3,000 repetitions of a new practice for it to become natural or habit or just what feels right to us, right? So with consent, if you imagine content with it, what you can imagine is just that person, that situation appears, and you just practice. No. No. And you can just imagine it again, and maybe this time, maybe. Yeah. Or of course, yes. I mean, I have to tell it myself. Yes feels the most vulnerable to me. It's like, wow, centered yes, and here's my heart, and here I am, right? So you can just notice what happens in you, but you can bring in content if that's useful for you. All right, good. Again, I encourage if this resonates for you, start getting it in as repetition, right? Could you do this when you get up in the morning or before you go to bed at night or with a friend, yeah? To get the repetition in, and then hopefully it also serves with some of the the intense content we're covering inside the summit. All right, friends. So there's one more kind of principle and practice that I want to introduce that can help in processing with ourselves. And this I really think of as, again, a core principle of somatics or embodied transformation, but it really also helps with that circle called somatic opening. So first, to kind of demonstrate the principle, it's called blending inside of our work, which how you can think about blending is it's being with something, an impulse, a contraction, a person, being with something on its own terms, okay? So if you just do this with me, if you can take your fist and just make a fist, pretty good grip, and with the other hand, try to pry that fist open, almost like you're frustrated with it. Like, why does it keep doing this? Why? And then feel your body while you're at it. So just try to pry it open, right? Notice what happens in your body and your breath as you're trying to make it do something different, okay? Okay, then let it go. Sadly, that's often how we struggle with the impacts from trauma inside of ourselves and often with other people, right? So let's do the fist again. And this I'm going to ask you to do is center yourself. And just get present with yourself and get present, especially in this hand. And then with this hand, this time, support this fist contracting exactly in the direction it's going. So your other hand comes here, and you're just going to gently support it in the direction it's going. And if it wants a little firmer support, give it that. If it wants a more gentle support, give it that. But notice what happens when we're supporting the contraction in the direction it's going. Notice that happens with your breath and in the rest of your body. Okay, then let's let that go. This is the principle of blending. And it is so counterintuitive often, but it's so important when we're dealing with contractions and patterns that are embedded in us out of individual or collective trauma. It's so important in conflict, whether internal conflict or interpersonal conflict. It's just a very important principle, really the soma, this mind-body organism, changes very quickly when it's blended with. rather than when it's tried to pry open. Okay. So what I want to invite you to do is to find a place in your body right now where you're feeling some sense of contraction, might even be numbness. It might even be like, oh, I'm wanting to really back up, right? Something that's happening that's more reactive and less resourced. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to blend with that. Okay. So I'm going to show first just the contraction in the body and what we can do, and then I'll show one that's more about trying to get away from and what we can do there. So, but just for you, it might be your jaws, it might be what's happening in your hips, it might be your heart. It might be like, oh, your jaws. You're like, oh boy, those are so tight, right? Based on watching all of this and trying to process it. So I'm going to go with my heart, with my chest, right along the sternum here. But whatever it is for you, I'll show some different options. But take a minute and feel that particular agitation or contraction in yourself. And really feel it at the level of sensation. It's okay if emotions are there too. And feel it like you're curious about it. You're not trying to manage it and you're not trying to make it go away. You're actually just like, okay, I'm going to have my attention be curious. And then in whatever way feels good to the contraction, just like we did with a fist, give it some support. So I notice with my chest, there's a little collapse that wants to happen in my chest, almost like my heart is trying to tuck itself in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to help tuck it in. Right, I'm letting my shoulders come up. I'm really offering a kind of support in and around my heart. And feel that, right? Just let your heart or your jaw, whatever you're doing, let it feel the support in the direction it's going. And keep feeling yourself. If it wants more pressure, add that. If it wants less, do less. But support this agitation or contraction or emotion in the direction it's going and just be with it. Good. We're literally doing that for 10, 15 seconds. Feeling, sensing, and then just gently let that go. And take a moment and feel yourself. So it might be that you feel a little bit more stirred or there's movement happening. What's funny is when we support things in the direction it's going, often they start to unfurl. So if you're feeling unfurling inside of yourself or heat or trembling, as much as you can, just make space and let that happen. Right? There is a deep intelligence inside of our somas that are looking to reharmonize, right? Are looking to heal. So if that's happening, just let that happen. There's movement through my chest. There's a little bit of like movement up here. Let that happen. Even if there's tears, let that happen. And then if you want to do it again, do it again. Okay. So I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to choose someplace else. I'm just going to choose my jaws. Okay. Jaws are here. This also back here is a part of what we call the mandibular band. So it could be you want to support your jaws by supporting just under your skull, the occiput here, but whatever works for you. And we'll just do again 10 seconds. So you can do the same place on your body a second time, or I'm just demoing a different place so that you can see that. But wherever needs this quality of support on your body, it might be your hips, right? It might be your belly, whatever it is for you. So bring your attention there. Don't try to change it. Just feel the quality of the contraction or the agitation or the stir. Feel it at the level of sensation. And then go ahead and make contact with yourself in a way that feels like it's supporting it in what it's already trying to do and take care of. And then bring your attention there and keep listening for what supports it in the direction it's going, in what it's trying to take care of, and just feel. Keep feeling yourself, keep that intention of support. And if something starts to soften or open or emotion comes, you can just be with that. You can hang out here as long as it serves you. And then I'm just going to we can go ahead and let it go. Again, that was about 10 seconds. And again, notice is something moving, softening, heating up. And as much as you can, make space for that. Make space for the unwinding or the moving. And if it's not, it's fine. Yeah. All right, the last one I'm going to give you is, a very natural, normal response to traumatization is to check out or dissociate, right? We all hear about the fight flight response. I like to say fight, flight, freeze, appease, dissociate. That those are all these, we didn't have to learn any of those. It came with this amazing organism that we are. And those tend to take over and generalize once we've been hurt or once our peoples are hurt over time. And often we pass on those strategies, parent to child, or literally generation to generation within a community. So blending with dissociating, that's what I'm going to take on for a minute, because plenty of us check out as a way to just be like, I'm out, it's too much, right? So you can notice in yourself that you're dissociated or that you're about to check out. And what I want to invite you, this might be a weird thing to track, but what I'd like you to notice is where you go and how you get there. Lots of people go back here, like I'm out of my body, but I'm just behind myself. Other people report that they're like, oh no, I go way out and I go someplace else altogether. That's fine. And then some other people talk about tucking themselves way down inside their guts where no one can find them. Right? These are some of the typical places we go when we dissociate, or again, the how is it that I dissociate? So I just want to introduce a blend, and this is more with like the backing up and backing out. And that is to literally just let yourself start to back up and out. Right? You can see what I'm doing is I'm just moving my body back and I'm starting to go up, out this way. If this isn't the way you go, you can still just try it on and see what it's like, but just very gently. It's like you're with yourself, you're conscious. Again, it's supporting the fist in the direction it's going. And just very gently, maybe 13%, not that much, not 100%, 13%, let yourself start to go and just go inside like it's okay to go, right? Your body, you're moving in the direction of the impulse to check out and go away. And just be with yourself consciously in doing that instead of trying to make yourself do something different, and just linger there. Again, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Feeling what it's like to follow that impulse to leave. Again, 13%, 15%. Feeling it. And then go ahead and following that same route, come on back to being present, right? Present with yourself. Yeah. If it's not easy to come back, it's okay. Just give yourself space. And then just also know that purposeful centering practice. It's like another muscle we're building to be present, open, connected, right? In that length with depth. That's a practice to build like another muscle of how to come back and be with ourselves more, with more presence, right? And more depth, right? And then bring that, of course, into our lives and our relationships. All right, so blending. Hopefully this helps you in processing what I'm sure is getting evoked through this conference. And also these can all be daily practices to really build those muscles of being present, centered, connected to what we care about, being able to be centered and consenting, yes, no, and maybe. And also the other side is hearing other people's yes, no, and maybes. And then this deep principle of working with ourselves around trauma, which is blending with those survival impulses rather than becoming so deeply embattled with ourselves, right? One of the ways I think about healing is it's the very holistic process of bringing safety, belonging, and dignity back together in ourselves so they're working with each other instead of battling each other. Yeah. To close here, because we're talking about collective trauma, I think there's this very important interdependent relationship between trauma healing and social change work, right? Social justice or social change work. I think that we can heal deeply and then become more skillful agents of change, right? More skillfully engage in broad-based social change, whether that's through social movement work or policy work or narrative work, right? All the different ways we do that. But the more deeply we can heal our trauma, the less we actually enact it in our out in the world work. And then social change, social justice organizing work serves healing because really those power over systems that depend on violence and exploitation and isolation, those are the root causes of most of our traumas. Not accidents, right? But they're the root causes of so many of our traumas. So when we want to prevent trauma in the future, we have to change our economy and our social systems, right? Today, so that they actually become more about power with, about interdependence, and about really that deep, harmonized relationship with the planet. Yeah. So social justice, right? Social change serves healing because it's so much one of the root causes of healing. And it can be very enlivening and empowering to be a part of life affirming social change. All right. It's great being with you. Thank you. Hope to see you again and hope you have a great conference.